Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Bob, who is a beginning photographer from Florida. Bob says he shot this near the 7 Mile Bridge in Marathon, Florida. Nikon D90, effective focal length of 27 millimeters, exposure trio is f13, ISO 200 in 1 second, and Bob lets us know in the backstory that he was working with a two-stop split neutral density filter. That's a filter that has neutral density at the top, is dark, then it's going to graduate into clear resin or glass at the bottom. We'd take the dark part of the filter and put it over the bright part of the scene, and that helps us to control contrast, helps the camera in one frame to see a greater dynamic range. Under questions and comments, Bob says that he really liked the change in texture from the rocks out to the smooth in the water, but he was really concerned with this area of sky, all the contrast and texture here, and how that was balancing in the image. He even thought about adding some texture over here. So I want to do something that I typically don't do when I'm critiquing. I like to say everything that I like and then make any changes. In the image today, you can already see what we're going to do. We're going to pretty quickly convert this to black and white and then talk about the things that we like. And I'm going to talk about right now why I'm going to convert this to black and white in the beginning, and just make a couple of general points about color that hopefully can help all of us. Whether you agree with the changes that I'm going to make or not. Color to me is one of the most challenging situations that we face as visual artists. First of all, there are just so many different color possibilities and color combinations, literally billions. The frequency of color and how they balance each other, all of that has an effect when it comes to just physical design. And then you add in the idea that color has so much emotional weight for the viewer. So many powerful archetypes are associated with color. When I look at this image, I see underneath the color this amazing study and textures and really powerful, beautiful balancing elements, and this quiet, sort of peaceful, serene area of water and this soft cloud that are sort of backed, and at the bottom sort of supported by a texture that has a rough edge to it. And there's so many different things to move into and enjoy here. But what's happening for me is that you have this electric pastel. So from just a physical frequency of energy standpoint, it's very, very difficult for me to move into these other areas of the image because I'm confronted with this color, and it's going to take a lot of something else like medium or an opposite color or something to balance that out. And the other thing that happens here is, from a psychological standpoint, this color starts to push this image into a box, and in that box is contained some of the most mature subjects in photography. Since color photography was invented, sunrise and sunset, two of the most photographed times a day or scenarios that have ever been photographed. And when we start to talk about very, very mature subjects, it can cause the viewer to look and say, I know what that is, and then to look away instead of moving into the image. So this image, from a design standpoint, all the color is really pushing me sort of back away from the other ideas in the image. And then from a psychological standpoint, it screams out sunrise, sunset. Please don't get me wrong. It's two of my favorite times of day. I love to, as a landscape photographer, shoot in color at those times of day, but so much of the time, while I might be just overwhelmed with gratitude at the beauty of seeing this electric sort of fiery sunrise or sunset, a lot of times I know as a visual artist that to photograph that, it can be difficult because those colors can overwhelm the viewer, and they may not be able to experience the scene in a context that has the same kind of impact of actually being there. And so what I want to do is get rid of the color by converting to black and white. Before I do that, I just want to mention two other things. I'd really encourage you to consider black and white as an option all the time. Most of you now have the ability to go into the menu of your camera and select monochrome processing on your JPEG. You don't have to guess in your mind's eye what the scene would look like in black and white. You can take a black and white picture while you're there. And somebody might say, well, what if it's dynamic or whatever? You know, you can always anticipate photographing in an area. Even if you know you're going to be shooting people or some action, you can photograph the background elements and preview them before the characters move onto the stage. And in a landscape situation like this, where it's pretty contemplative, you could have the time to do this previewing work. And then I'd really encourage you that once you're inside of Photoshop, to preview all of your shots in black and white. One simple way to do that is just to go to your channels. The default is that these channels should show up as filtered black and white versions of your shot. So you have 3 versions here in black and white of every shot. And you can see what I've done here. I've just used the red channel to do a simple black and white conversion. Once I get to here, Bob talked about subtle luminosity and tonal changes and textures, and all of that starts to come forward for me. From a psychological standpoint, I slow down now. This big negative space in here that's reflecting the sky is so ethereal, and it starts to put me into a peaceful, very slow, contemplative state, that all of that electric pastel was keeping me from feeling the serenity and peace of this situation. Outside of the feeling that happens and how I settle into this image more from a psychological standpoint, the thing that Bob was concerned about to me now has really remedied itself, getting rid of the color. When I got rid of the color, these really beautiful, subtle luminosity changes down in here, you're seeing a series of shapes and implied energy that pushes back against the wedges up here. Another thing that happens is that in the color version, it was hard to experience the rocks at all because they were in monochrome and everything else had so much color. Now the rocks have a lot more visual weight, and I get a sense of sort of very rough, coarse edges and textures that are bookending 2 subjects that are much more ethereal and a lot more smooth. Something else that starts to happen, before in here I was confronted with just this circle of color. Now when the color goes away, I not only get a sense of this peaceful area in the middle of the image, I start to experience what's around it. I start to get a really beautiful sense of 2 implied C curves that are playing off of each other back and forth. And another thing that takes on a lot of power here is the black. The mangroves over here in the silhouette. It does a really beautiful job of anchoring the image in a dynamic way. In the middle part of this image, it starts to become pretty symmetrical, and that could get static, and this really helps to break that up. But it does it in a beautiful way. It's not so jarring that I'm taken out of what's happening, and a big part of that has to do with the fact that the shapes that are being implied here in the silhouette are beautiful in the way they rhyme 2 of the other real dominant ideas in the image. It's a stunning landscape image. Last thing that I want to say that's fun about this image, and it's something you could try to incorporate into your next landscape shoot. So much of the time, and I'm included in this, people that teach big landscape shooting will say to get low and cut down on the middle ground, because the middle ground so much of the time has a lot of information and can get busy. What's fun about this shot is in some respects Bob is shooting over the foreground, and he's taken kind of a blank area of negative space and made it one of the main subjects. But because this is smooth and he's surrounding it with so much texture, you get this really beautiful need for this smooth in the middle to balance all this other stuff that's around it, but pretty non-traditional in a landscape, dynamic, traditional landscape shot, to just have kind of a symmetrical area of blank right in the middle. I think another thing that helps to pay this off is the fact that for the most part, that shape is really sort of arcing, that's implied and dynamic, and even though it flattens out here, you really get sort of a sense of the cloud continuing the feeling of this really beautiful circle in the middle. And again, even that was harder to see in the black and white version. I don't even know if I turned these layers on. I just played around with popping contrast in a local way a little bit more because I like high contrast, but now that I turn those back on again, I really just like the simple red channel conversion. Would love to hear your feedback about the critique today. I want to say a huge thank you to Bob for sharing a really stunning landscape image with us, and I want to say a big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on another episode of the Daily Critique.